Morning. We'll just give a quick second for people to load in and we'll get started. Maybe just go back to the title slide. Okay, I think we'll get started as people load in. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, a collaboration of ULI Toronto and CT Futures, how Europe built co-living into a mainstream asset class and what Canada can learn. As always, we begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge that some participants are joining us from other parts of Canada, and we encourage reflection on the traditional territories and treaties that shape those lands. And finally, we acknowledge and honor those who've come here involuntarily, particularly those who are descendants from enslavement. Our regular ULI Toronto audience will know that ULI Toronto has produced an important report answering the call to Action 92, a guide to truth and reconciliation and corporate responsibility and land development, Canada's first such guide oriented at the real estate and development sector. Years in the making, this report is just a milestone in our journey into truth and reconciliation, a journey that we invite you all to join. A link will be posted in the chat rather, and you could always locate this report on the ULI Toronto website. Lastly, we're excited to offer a few final spaces to an Indigenous Cultural Competency Learning module next week, next Thursday, April the 30th. It's a full day, 9 to 4:30 at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto on Spadina Avenue, Spadina and Bloor. If you've not experienced or taken in this educational program, which usually we make available each October, I highly recommend this module led by Bob Goulet, amazing leader in this space. I consider it essential learning for all of us who work in these lands. And a special note that ULI Toronto will be covering all the costs for this module for the few spaces we have left. So when you go to the link, which we'll put in the chat, you just simply put ULI in the code and it will be free registration. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge the leadership of today's moderator, who will be introduced shortly, the Honourable Carolyn Bennett, Canada's ambassador to Denmark, for her national leadership in the Truth and Reconciliation space as former Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations for Canada. Before I hand over the program to our partner, CT Futures, I want to advise our audience of another opportunity, and that's a co-living roundtable that we'll be co-hosting here in Toronto. For those developers and investors interested in a deeper dive into the discussion that we'll be launching today into growing co-living in Canada, there's a follow-up workshop on May the 5th, and there are limited spaces available for that. So we'll ask you, we'll put this in the chat, to email fiona@tobogganflats.com. If you're interested in participating, we'll again drop her email into the chat, and you can always reach us at ULI Toronto as well. So with that all said, I would now like to welcome our co-host, Thomas Townsend of CT Futures, who will formally launch today's program and introduce today's special moderator. Thomas, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. As Richard has said, this is a collaborative event, and we are very grateful for ULI's support. I'm one of a small team of 4 at CT Futures working on co-living, and in particular, co-living for older adults. The panel today will have 3 themes: co-living as a housing type, co-living as an asset class, and co-living and creating a community living experience. Our moderator is Carolyn Bennett, Canada's ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. Ambassador Bennett is uniquely qualified to observe on our subject. She brings a doctor's perspective on the rising tide of loneliness, a public official sense of housing and how housing needs of Canadians are changing. And as ambassador, the ability to look at the leading edge of co-living in Europe. Carolyn, I'm handing it over to you for the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you all. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Richard, for all of this, and particularly the land acknowledgement and trying to get people out to hear Bob Goulet, which I just think is, as you said, just essential. And happy Earth Day, everyone. I think it's a day on which the land acknowledgement is even more poignant as we recognize the Indigenous teachings of thinking 7 generations out, and as we are increasingly aware of the need to protect the waters and the land and the ice, and coming from Denmark, where sustainability is just so much a part of their identity, that it's great to be doing this on Earth Day. Over the last 2 years that I've been here, I have been so impressed by the innovation and creativity as the Danes have addressed the multiplicity of needs of housing and a shared responsibility. Public-private partnerships, together with the support of foundations and civil society, are embraced. As a physician, 20 years ago, I think we had really good research that social isolation was as damaging to people's health as smoking. And I think that it's been so important as a Canadian to realize really how we really have to really look to other places to adopt the innovation and creativity that we've lived here. And Denmark has been at the forefront of collective living approaches for many decades. But more recently, there have been rapid developments in rental offerings, and in particular, co-living for demographics, including the older adults, young professionals, and single parents. Jack Renteria has been at the forefront of the big changes here in Copenhagen. Mark first with the Cactus Towers, and later with the cross-generational community living by Alpha. Jack has been an inspiration during my time here and has generously been able to share his knowledge and wisdom with many Canadians coming here to learn. And now we get to share him with you all online. Jack is currently the president of the Urban Land Institute Denmark, a board member of Blocks Hub, and the founder of Generation Global. Jack will talk to the first challenge that Thomas talked about, which is establishing co-living as a housing type in a market that has little experience with the concept outside of boarding houses and student accommodation. And I think hopefully you will leave today knowing that co-living doesn't mean you've got to get a roommate.
Great.
Over to you, Jack.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Very, very pleased to be part of this group today. I'm going to just load up my presentation here and make sure that everyone can see it. So I'm very happy to be here. You know, I'm Canadian, but I've been living in Denmark for 17 years now. I'm also Danish. I thought I'd give a little introduction as to who I am, and then I'd like to talk, you know, in order to set the stage of what are the drivers of how we live and will live. And as a result, that's kind of where co-living was born, by looking at these global mega trends. And then I'll go into a case study, Cactus Towers, which was more or less the first professionally run co-living development in Denmark. So, you know, I mentioned that I came here 17 years ago. I've now become truly Danish and a Copenhagener, but very, very excited to see what is happening on the Canadian market as well. I am a former partner at 3XN Architects, and then I went over to the development side and started working with a company called Living by Alpha. I now have my own company. It's called Generation Global, and I work with the development of new residential concepts. So on the side, I have another kind of job, and that's I'm the chair of ULI Denmark, and I'm a ULI Global Governing Trustee. I have learned a lot about co-living and new residential concepts through ULI. We started a product council where we started looking at what are these new residential concepts. So we did deep dives into co-living, student living, build to rent, and then what we called age qualified living. And then we also looked at the themes like ESG or research and data, social value. We looked at the investment cases, policy, and technology behind them. And so that really, really helped me learn a lot about what are the mega trends that are resulting in new living concepts like co-living. And those can be things like demographic shifts, global mobility, flexibility and convenience, affordability, loneliness, and increased investment into this sector. I'm just going to touch on a couple of those because I think it's really quite important for us to understand why we are changing or why we are having new kinds of needs in terms of our housing accommodation. I love this graph. ULI came up with this graph. It was from it shows like from the 1950s how the demographic, split was in Europe, where you only had 8% over 65 in 2022, 20% over 65. And then you can see that it's increasing over time. Right now, we live in a time where we more or less have a very even split across, the age groups. And this means we have a need for new housing models in many different forms. And so, just trying to I like this graph as well because what it shows is that we're kind of moving away from what was traditional, where, say, my parents, went to school until they were 20, then entered adult working life, and then retirement. And now what we're doing is we're really kind of seeing that people are staying younger longer, and they're actually, I'm having trouble shifting my slides here. There we go. And they're staying and they're living longer as well. And so the traditional kind of living cycle has changed a lot, and so I found this very interesting for co-living, especially because if we look at this slide, we can see that there's this group in between ages 20 and 40, which captures this kind of staying younger longer, delaying life decisions like getting married. And so this is where we started thinking about, okay, well, what is co-living? How can we start producing something for this demographic? Tied in with the fact that we have a more global workforce or a mobile workforce. In Copenhagen, we were noticing that there were 20,000 internationals arriving in Copenhagen every year, and they were all having a very difficult time finding a place to live. In fact, many of them were living in rooms in other people's apartments. I also took a look at this report from JLL, which showed that Copenhagen was kind of ranked number 3 in terms of having co-living fundamentals. And that means good paying jobs, many, good life work balance. It was really an attractive place for a lot of young professionals to move. And so this information was really important for us as we started building the business case for co-living. Add to the fact that people are looking for flexibility and convenience, affordability. In Copenhagen, we have a market where 44% of all households are single person households. And that means that some of the apartment stock that's out there is actually way too big for just one person. There is a demand and a need for smaller units. In addition, a lot of people are paying quite a huge amount of their disposable income for rent. And this really created a problem of affordability. Loneliness has also been a massive issue. When I moved to Denmark 17 years ago, we didn't call it loneliness, but it was there, this idea that, how do we activate ourselves? How do we get out and kind of mingle with everybody else? So this has become an epidemic now. I mean, we see that in the UK, 9 million people in the UK are sometimes or often lonely. Um, it's really become quite a very strong reason for why we need to build community in our new living concepts. So one of the other areas is investment. If you take a look at the ULI Emerging Trends in Real Estate report, you'll see that 5 of the top sectors to watch are actually new living concepts, whether it's senior living, whether it's student living, co-living, or service departments. Back in the day, residential was just one line in terms of like the asset classes. Now they're really like scattered all over, you can see. So all this goes to say that now we're looking at buildings no longer just as assets, but as products that are tailored to customer needs. And therein lies the case study for Cactus Towers. So Cactus Towers was actually a building that was owned by Catella. It was originally supposed to be student living, but myself and a facility management company called Cobblestone and a marketing company called Copenhagen Windows were all engaged to more or less relook at the project and see what we could bring to it. And so we thought that we would take a look at co-living models in the UK, which were still nascent. They were still very, very new, and see if we could do some tweaks and adjustments to kind of make it fit into Cactus Towers. Now, this was an unproven concept, I got to say. It tapped into that mystery demographic of expats, young professionals, in-betweeners, you could say. And I know that Catella was like, they were saying, this is unproven. How can we just go all in? And so it was necessary to do quite a lot of research. And we did that. We looked at different groups. I went out to speak with the Confederation of Danish Industries, Copenhagen Capacity, and International House to hear about how important it was to attract talent to Denmark in order to keep Danish companies competitive. I spoke with the companies themselves, like L'Oreal, Maersk, Novo Nordisk, some of the larger companies, to ask how difficult it was for them to find housing for their employees, how important it was that their employees were happy in where they were living. I heard some very sad stories. One of the companies said that it had put some of its international employees under suicide watch because they were so lonely. So it was very evident that a lot of these young people moving from other places, whether it was other parts of Denmark or other parts of the world, really needed a sense of community. And that was confirmed by the demographic itself when we started holding focus groups, asking, what are they looking for in terms of a place to live? Community ended up being the number one thing that was important for them. As they moved to a new city, a new country, they really needed opportunities and ways to mix and meet with other people. And that was shared common areas, services, activities. We had a community manager in the building as well who facilitated a lot of the activities. And then we also brought in an app. There are 80 groups within this Cactus app that they have created themselves. So you've got going to the movies app, going to the movies group, cooking groups. These are ways that people can really interact. And what I particularly like is that you could move from Toronto one weekend, go on that app, and at 6 p.m. know what kinds of events are happening that afternoon and attend a dinner or something like that. As one of the residents told me, it's kind of like instant friends. The whole idea of this project was you sleep in the room and you live in the building. This was our app, which I told you about already. I'll show you a couple of the spaces. This is the cafe in Cactus Towers. These are the co-working areas. A lot of these people also work from home sometimes. So of course, it's nice for them to have different areas that they can work in. Common kitchens. These are very, very popular. A lot of them actually order in during the week, and then during the weekends, they cook. A gym, the rooms, the living spaces. The single units are 24 square meters. You can see the floor plan here. They each have a little balcony. The fact that it's designed by Bjarke Ingels Group, or BIG, helps a little bit. It creates a rather interesting living space. Then there are double units available as well. Very nicely, fitted out. And these are some of the double units here. Now, what makes Cactus work, I think, is more than just the architecture. I mean, it is that there are amenity spaces, there are activities, there is a tech platform. It really, really brings this group together and gives them a strong sense of community. I think what is very fascinating, though, and what is super important to this working is that it has an investment case behind it. And Ashley is going to speak about that after me. But I think this is where we can kind of see that first and foremost, the units rented out like in a flash, 492 apartments in 3 months via Instagram. So it really was kind of like a new asset class, new typology, new marketing program. Because it was new, we had to speak with the city planning department and really kind of lobby for co-living because usually they don't allow units this small. We had to create a whole operational platform. So facility management, building administration, community management all had to work together and efficiently and in a solid kind of business model. Now, what it resulted in is the highest rent per square meter annually in Copenhagen when it opened. I mean, it was an enormous, like a very, very high rent per square meter, which was good for the investors. But for the people living in there, it was equally as good because we priced the units at the same price as they would pay for a room in somebody else's apartment. And I know that it sounds high compared to Toronto prices, but in Denmark, this is quite a reasonable rent, 1,750 Canadian dollars per month. And it's kind of crazy to think that rents can be that high, and that's the problem around the world. But that's the equivalent of what someone would pay for a room in somebody else's apartment. The rents have been increasing, which just goes to show that we are really now having to look at alternatives. I mean, we're really needing to look at, does co-living play a role in the affordability conversation? We have 70 to 80 people on the waiting list at any time. And then, from the investment case perspective, because it does need to, fit an investment case, the project was actually sold last year for 1.4 billion Danish kroner, which was about 280 million Canadian dollars. And we were very worried because we didn't know if it was going to sell as a hotel, as in the category of a hotel or a residential. And residential obviously is a better yield. And it sold as residential. So we now have like our first real kind of benchmark for co-living and transactions within co-living in the Nordics. So that was pretty much my presentation. I just wanted to kind of introduce the drivers for why we looked into co-living, what our co-living project was as the first real professional managed co-living in Denmark, and how it ended up being quite a success story from both the tenant's perspective and from the investor's perspective.
Thank you, Jack, so much. And you've done a brilliant job explaining theme one, co-living as a housing type, but the demographics, the need for community, the experiments, and now proven real solutions. So tusen tak. We want everybody to come over and see it for real, right? Is that an open invitation that you'll take everybody through, like you have about 20 of the guests coming through the embassy? But that's so great. Thank you.
It would be my
so now
pleasure.
if we move to so as we move to theme two, it's quite clear that nothing gets built without money financing, and the introduction of this new housing type comes with many questions and reservations, as we've heard from the financial sector. Yet in Europe, it's exciting to learn how co-living is now its own asset class. And in London, one of the fastest growing segments of the multifamily sector. So Ashley Perry is um, the watched co-living emerge as a response to the high rents and allowing many Londoners to live close to the center of the city, close to their work, and enjoy the benefits of thriving social experience. Ashley's experience has across both the single and multifamily strategies has helped to secure the planning, but the funding and public support for thousands of rental homes across Europe. And and Ashley now holds the leadership position at the, let me just help me with this, Ashley,
Association
the
for Rental
association.
Living. Yeah.
Yes. So there you go. And I think we'll just hand it over. You are also chair of the Investors and Lenders Forum, whilst also chairing the Urban Land Institute's UK Residential Council. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And nice to be here. Likewise with Jack's introduction, I'm also, despite my strange accent, a expat Canadian, and depending on who I'm talking to, do sound a little bit more Canadian than I probably sound on this webinar. So I'm going to be covering some of the sort of investment trends, the product typologies that are emerging, and kind of picking up the mantle from some of the key areas that Jack covered earlier. I think it's a great case study in sort of pioneering investment in that project at Cactus in Copenhagen. So it's a good case study to look at some of the things that some of the themes we might see here in the UK. Bit of a brief introduction to myself. Acquisitions Director, multifamily at Apache Capital. We're a pioneering and private investment manager. We've delivered over 6,000 homes across purpose-built student accommodation and purpose-built rental housing to make sure that translates well into Canadian audience. And importantly, we've got vertically integrated asset management operations. So I've, as mentioned, in terms of my co-living experience, predominantly in the early stages of the sector growing into challenging micro locations such as Manchester, which created an artificial cap in the number of co-living beds that they would allow. And I've kind of followed that through with my role as chair of the Living Sectors Product Council here in the UK. In terms of areas that I'm going to be covering, so co-living in the context of European living sector investment, what's kind of happened in the last decade here in the UK, and how people have created from pioneering kind of niche entrepreneurial platforms into the sector becoming a bit more institutional. Talk about some of the key players in UK co-living. It is very nascent here, but is working in a very good, strong way. And then how is it? What is working and how we're making it work? And then what next for the sector? A few kind of thoughts as to how that's going to evolve. I would flag on the right-hand side a report that if you're a ULI member, which I presume everyone on the call is, you can get the 2023 European Co-Living Best Practice Guide, which is a good background piece of research as well. So I just wanted to focus on a very recent research report that came out of Investec, one of the large funders of alternative assets here in the UK, debt funder specifically, not equity. If you look at the bottom, it sort of struck me. I was discussing with an early stage sort of front end investor in co-living recently, who sent me this report that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's quite a headline if you actually look at the fundamentals of what everyone's excited about. And my next slide will have an AI featured image. The data center kind of narrative, 76% of investors looking to grow their exposure to data centers. Co-living is only second to that group, which I think speaks for itself. If you look at the right-hand slide, which I hope is easily visible to you all, we'll talk about where co-living sits in between build to rent or multifamily or purpose-built rental housing and purpose-built student accommodation in a moment. But really one of the big things there, and linking a little bit to Jack's point, is the investability and where the yield sits, essentially the value of the property on the basis of its secure cash flow and income stream. So broadly speaking, what you're seeing there in the where yield premium is sitting, it is a slight premium to the general residential sector, but probably not as significant a premium to it, which is good. You want it trading tighter than purpose-built student accommodation because it's eminently more investable if it is. In terms of the context, and the easiest way for people to understand this, kind of what we call in the UK BTR apartments owned by institutional investors and private investors rented out at market or sub-market rental levels, and purpose-built student accommodation. The graph on the table on the right shows the scale. So whilst we're excited that there's some great case studies, you can go around and see 6, 10, 12 really good co-living schemes here in London quite easily. It's a small segment of the market. You're talking about 10,000 units, 5,000 of which are in London. The rest are spread across a number of kind of key regional cities here. So it's small, but it's punching a little bit above its weight. But it's got a long way to go, and has not been without its headwinds in creating that sort of investment thesis and asset class. If I show you 3 images here, I suspect if you were to Google co-living London or co-living UK, you will probably see the image there on the left, which quite confidently is probably the best image of that particular asset in that location. Those that are uninitiated to London, this is in a emerging regeneration neighborhood in West London, very close to the new high-speed rail that's coming to the UK. That product initially opened 10 years ago. It has now changed hands due to some challenging circumstances for the original owner. But that started off very small. So these were 12 to 16 square meter studios and tudios, or tudio where you've got 2 small units backing onto each other with a shared bathroom. I think it's very clear to say that that product typology hasn't really worked and certainly hasn't really been replicated. In terms of the amenity approach in that generation 1 co-living, I think it's quite clear that the floor by floor amenity, where you're not intermingling, to Jack's point earlier, intermingling with renting the whole building, that didn't really work when everything's sort of broken up floor by floor. In terms of the middle example, this is a branded platform called Folk, and this Folk associated with a particular location. These opened, several assets opened in the last 3 to 4 years, somewhat born out of the rising like a phoenix from the ashes of some of the previous collective assets. So a lot of these were created off the back of a lot of the hard work of key members of that previous business. This is more institutionally owned, so this is larger scale, 300-400 unit projects. As stated, they're very similar typology to what Jack was talking about, not without its challenges in terms of getting that we could talk about planning use classes and zoning equivalent language. This product is sort of the benchmark of what good looks like right now, operated and very similar tone. If I look at the stats and data that we've got around the lease up, the speed of getting these buildings full and keeping them full, very strong kind of numbers, very similar to where Jack was talking about, although I don't know anybody who's leasing up a building in 3 months at nearly 500 units. So a credit to that operational team. Then on the right-hand side, very interesting proposals from a relatively new group. This is very much those that be familiar with London. This is in the Barbican area. This is a sort of heritage location and very desirable high barriers to entry to actually move to this kind of place. What that particular developer calls ultra-urban repurposed co-living. So this is a office to residential conversion. Great example of what I think will happen and could happen in some of the major cities in Canada and beyond. So a good example to kind of follow through the future. I think it's very clear that there's some similarities to what Jack covered in terms of the Danish tone. Co-living here in the UK began from sort of niche entrepreneurial platforms and strategies. It required some threading the needle on whether it's a hotel or whether it's short stay apartments, some restrictions around that. but it's now very clearly established in particularly London planning policy. So people understand the purpose-built shared living model, and it's rapidly institutionalizing. I think some of the recommendations for those people on the call thinking about takeaways from this conversation is take Jack up on a tour of that impressive asset in Denmark. Likewise, there'll be wide open doors for people to come here to come and visit UK co-living assets. Talk about what works, what hasn't worked. I mean, local authorities here in the UK are doing more and more of that. They're getting outside of their immediate locations and going out and seeing product in particular spots that they maybe haven't even thought about going to. The project here on the right-hand side is a 49-story tower in Croydon on its way to London Gatwick Airport. Again, extremely pioneering. This asset was built predominantly with modular construction, 6, 7 floors of amenities, and I understand it's leased extremely well. This was backed by significant private equity capital and is a strong example of co-living at scale. It's over 600-700 units. So that's probably the most extreme amenitized end of what we're seeing here in the UK. In terms of sort of the nuances of the various operating groups, some of the key players to kind of touch on and maybe think about for your own audience is the various different brand names, which again, take away and go and look at how they present themselves to the market. Different typology around length of stay from 1 week to 12 plus months, and particularly the sort of one-off nature of a bill, all-inclusive rents, including your energy costs, including some other elements, including sort of cleaning of your apartment. It's very much a kind of service level that we probably don't see in normal purpose-built rental housing. And I think that's an important facet to this because depending on the location, you can go to that level of service and that level of experience. In terms of community programming, Jack talked about that sort of live and engaged community. We see that, I would say, in a very strong way across the larger assets. There are some examples of smaller platforms that are more like what we call a home of multiple occupation, maybe a 6, 7 unit asset within a shared house. In the example of Cohabs, which is backed by Canadian pension fund money, that is very much more sort of it's driving its own community within the building itself. And I think this is the critical part of this as well when you're into thinking about what your consumer audience is looking for, as well as kind of matching the operating strategy around that. You will have potentially some more voids than you were going to, so you need to drive up that revenue per available room as well, very similar to the hotels market. In terms of sort of making it work, as I like to sort of distill it, there's some interesting dynamics at play here in the UK. There are markets that have a significant supply of BTR apartments and purpose-built student accommodation, and it's quite clear that co-living is able to attract a slightly different audience, particularly the sort of single occupant renter that might not necessarily want to live by themselves, and they want to have space that's where they're able to hang out with a cohort of people that's similar to them. And I think that one of the areas that is clearly in focus, people understand what we call here in the UK BTR houses or single family housing being for a certain audience, BTR apartments being for the urban professional, and student housing being quite clearly for students. I think co-living is bridging that gap, and you're seeing a lot more of the large scale in-house operators and investors that have got capability and scale in purpose-built student accommodation. The likes of Scape, large student housing group from Australia, have launched their first co-living asset here in the UK. And I think that sort of evolution from the niche entrepreneurial groups is going to only benefit the asset class. So what next? I mean, I think one of the biggest things that when you look back at the growth of the sector, there are co-living assets being prepped for sale here in the UK. So these are stabilized, proven, defensive asset classes now, and I think we're going to see where transactions kind of breed that confidence. I think the next thing that I'm seeing very clearly is that product evolution. There are now proposals to look at doing 3 and 4 bed apartments with less studios. So these are sort of the best of both worlds. You're getting your small cohort of people within a unit, as well as sharing amenity spaces. And I think that's going to be quite interesting because you're able to drive that room rate slightly lower, because you'll be getting a slightly smaller room, but you've got your own space within the unit. And I think just to sort of maybe add some levity to the conversation, I discussed a recently acquired co-living asset, which again was small studios. And that particular investor just said to me, we're just letting out small apartments. So we can't lose track of keeping it simple, particularly when the language of complexity and operational intensity can put people off. And we need to be very clear about being able to keep that as simple as possible. Thank you very much, and look forward to any questions that you might have. And likewise, if anyone would like to connect afterwards, more than happy to.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I think the whole investability piece and the fact that there have been experiments and learnings, and particularly that planning has embraced it in terms of being able to office to rental conversion, that I think a lot of us are watching as a need. But you also talked about the live engaged community and making it work. So I love it about the product evolution and breeding confidence, and but the KISS principle of just letting out small apartments where people get to know one another, I think is kind of perfect. So thank you so much. And now we move on to theme 3 with Martin Kring. I, here in Copenhagen, had the opportunity to visit one of Plushascen's developments here in Copenhagen. I just couldn't help it when you were there. It was just like there's something that changes the way we think of community living, with older adults and families with many single parents living in the community, cooking and eating in a common house, enjoying life together, sort of booking their night out with friends from the community. But I remember, I think there was even a workshop to entice those older men reluctant to leave their tools and craftsmanship behind, where they could bring their favorite tools, and that the guys would have a place to be enthusiastic about the move. So Martin Kring is the CEO of Denmark's largest co-living concept with over 900 units across several development sites. Martin stresses the need to think of co-living as a comprehensive product, offering a living experience different from traditional rental offerings. So more than renting out small apartments. So I think you have lived a life of creating experiences, Martin, and we really look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And also thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to have the chance to present Plushusen to you all. I'll just share my slides, 2 seconds. There we are. Maybe just a short introduction to myself. As Carolyn said, a long experience in creating experiences. I actually came out of the theme park industry, working 29 years in Legoland. So probably something you all played with and inspired you to some kind of brick building. So funny enough, I ended in buildings. In 2018, I was contacted by an institutional investor and a family office that had made a joint venture together, working on how people wanted to live in the future. And what inspired me when they talked to me, they wanted something different. They wanted us to think different, especially around quality of life. And my thought was, if I could take some of the things that we offer a family 1 or 2 days in Legoland and put into daily life, that would really be something. And out of that came Plushusen, which I would like top line to present you for today. So no surprise from that the main goal in Plushusen is actually to create a community where residents experience improved quality of life and really have joy in an active everyday with their neighbors. And one of the measurement points is, although it's rental, a home no one can imagine leaving again. And today, it's actually going fast, Caroline. So today we have just passed 1,200 units in operation, have 8 sites open, are currently constructing 2 more sites with totally 350 units more. So the sites are between 97 and 226 units, and I'll come a little bit back to how a development look. We are primarily in like the outer Copenhagen area, just in the suburbs around Copenhagen, but also in Aarhus, which is the second largest city in Denmark. What is Plushusen? It is really a community-based, purpose-built rental. So where you see the student housing, probably be your high-rise, small rooms, we are building the developments around both flats and row houses, also smaller than people normally live due to the shared facilities, but still bigger homes, bigger flats than you have in, for instance, student housing or young professional housing. So we see it as a modern way of living together, where we combine the need and the desire to be part of a community, but also leave people their privacy when they want to. So basically, a home in Plushusen is a home where you can go home, you can close the door for 2 days and live like you do in a normal rental row house or flat, without having to be part of the community. So that's where the privacy and the choice to choose comes in. So as Caroline said in introduction, that Denmark has a long history and that in co-living, and we really got inspired from that, but also saw how the world has developed on with the needs for individuality, freedom, and flexibility. What is important is that people should not spend their time on maintaining their rental home or anything. They should have time to be part of the community. So really everything we've done is around securing that the busy tenants still have time. One way of making life convenient is naturally, and you probably all know, is about location. Being close to public transport, shopping, schools, to nature, so that people have time to spend in the community. We have seen is extremely important in people's choice of where to live. Where we are very different, you can say, is that our target group is really cross-generational. When we started Plushusen, we thought that we were going to do pure senior living, co-living. But as part of the whole research, what we're going to do, we actually surveyed 8,000 seniors. And one of the questions we asked them was whether they really wanted to live alone or they wanted to live together with someone else. And 74% of these seniors said, no, they really want to live with families with kids. That question cost us a year in planning because our site choice of houses, our common house, all was wrong. So we had to change that. And while we started changing that, we naturally secured that the families had similar thoughts. So we surveyed 2,000 families with children as well. And 89% of them told us we would love to live in a community with seniors. So that's how we ended with the focus on families with children and active adults, 55 plus, as we call them. So really about creating something where we still respect privacy, but again, offer a lot on the value in living together. And I can tell you, COVID just put the speeder full down on this, as people really recognized how much their neighbors mean to them. So for the young families, you can say it's really about low maintenance homes. It's about community and safety. The fact that there's always someone at home, the fact that the children can play freely outside with their neighbors, with their friends. The flexibility and freedom in going to common dining and being in interest-based activities that fits into their busy schedule means a lot. And then the benefits from living together with the older generation, a lot, 25% of our tenants are actually single parents, and they find like they're spare grandparents for their kids when they live in our communities. So this has really had a big impact on how people live together. For the elderly, you can say it's the privacy in your own rental home, but it's the social interaction when you really want. And a lot of them, as Jack showed, we get older and older. A lot of them worry about maintaining a house, maintaining a garden. A lot of them move in as a couple, telling us, we really want to make sure that my partner is in a good network when one of us falls away. So this is important for them, together with the flexibility and freedom of being able to participate when they want. Everyone is worried about feeling lonely. It's a big thing, I think, in most of the world. And again, here, community means a lot. And then the security in having younger people being able to help them when they need, and their children giving them joy in all day during the day was what made us land where we have landed. As our communities are quite big, you can say there are between 250 and 550 people living everywhere. It is not like it's one big community, it's interest-based communities in the big community. And to make sure that works, to make sure there's something that interests everyone, we decided to put in a community coordinator in each location. They are the one that supports the resident initiatives, but they also organize a lot of activities on their own. In generally, they are the daily contact person. They're actually also our estate agent, as they know the other tenants. So they are the ones when we have new tenants coming in that finds the right one, and then also welcomes them together with tenants when they come in. So they're really responsible for building the community together with the tenants. It doesn't help that you have a lot of activities if people don't know what's happening. It doesn't help that you have a lot of shared facilities if you can't book them, and so on. So we had a Plushusene app created back in 2019, 2020, and it developed on the scenes. So that's where all the tenants can communicate together, but also with us. This has been extremely important for me, it's the glue in the community. There needs to be a way of communicating together, but also to communicate with us, but also see everything that is happening. If we look a little bit more into the developments, you can say our houses and flats are between 63 and 136 square meters with an average of 84. So generally smaller than most Danes they live. It can be row houses, townhouses, but it can also be up to 4-story high rises in the suburbs where we are building. Every site has at least one common house, 600 to 1,000 square meters, so that we can convince, you can say, the tenants about living on fewer square meters. And all has really been chosen to give life, to feel good when you are in it. It's also all about sustainability, and you can say from a building perspective, our construction is naturally also sustainability certified. The shared facilities, this is really about inspiring people to use it, but it's also to make sure that we actually can cater for all the different kind of interests and communities that come out of that. So here you see example of a dining hall. Typically 25 to 27% of the tenants can eat at one time. There's a full production kitchen where we put in a chef for 4 months to teach the tenants how to cook for many people, and they learn. And last year we had 35,000 meals served across our Plushusene sites. tenants cooking for tenants. As you can see, you can play badminton, hockey, table tennis in the middle. So it's really about finding something that inspires people. We have fitness in a house so that you can save your fitness membership as well. It's about a lounge where there's always coffee, there's always today's newspaper, so that people can go and get a time together with their neighbors and discussing, probably Trump most of the time right now, but everyone else. Important is, as Caroline mentioned, there's the workshop. You cannot get the elderly men to move if they cannot get access to their tools. And guest rooms, really important. A lot of us have empty rooms standing at home where very rare some guests sleep in there. So we build guest rooms where 4 can sleep in each guest room. And so through that, we can convince people to live in a smaller room. Here are quite a few impressions. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see a little bit about all the shared facilities that Plusshusene is built around, and where it's really about inspiring people to come and use it. And are they using it? In 2025, across the 6 sites that were open from the beginning of the year, we had over 5,000 community activities listed in the calendars. A stable Plusshusene community has 80 to 110 activities in the calendar per month, out of which more than 60% are purely tenant-driven, and we are then to different levels involved in the rest. Does it work? I talked about sustainability, and you can say the social part of ESG. 78% of our tenants tell us that they have got new friends since they moved in. They feel extremely safe. 91% say they feel safe in the neighborhood. There's a Danish research on this where it's 71%, and only 1% of our tenants feel unsafe in the neighborhood. And coming back to the theme of loneliness, you can see 3% say they often feel alone, although they would like to be together with someone. The Danish average on this is 12%. So some really impressive scores. And I think as a business, one of the things we have to think about is that almost daily contact to our neighbors actually have bigger influence on our quality of life than almost daily contact with our families. That comes out of a big Danish research with more than 100,000 participants. So we should never underestimate what neighbors mean. A English study from Warwick Business School also show you have to earn around 50,000 Canadian dollars more a month to improve quality of life to the same level as if you go from talking to your neighbors less than once a month into almost daily. So neighbors can really do a big difference, and that's what we are working on in Plusshusene. So does it make a difference? We have extremely high tenant satisfaction. We are fully let. Some of our house types has what looks like going to be at least 10 years waiting time. We get a premium rent. So you can say it's a purpose-built rent product, but we can take a premium. And when you take that premium and deduct the extra costs in running this, it's EBITDA positive. Our churn is half of market, so people stay low. And depending on how you look at it, it's good for the buildings. It might not be good for getting your rent up, but it gives a lot of safety on to get in the rent in every month. And as I said, long waiting lists. So what the way we look at it, you can say, is that we in the built environment really can make a big difference for people's well-being. In my opinion, community doesn't happen by accident, and when it's large scale, you have to facilitate. And as you could hear, we changed from senior to cross-generational, so research pays off, and you have to understand your market. Location, no chance. I think maybe also I have seen there are some tones around. This is a chance to get the empty nesters to move. A lot of the elderly people can't find the right product to move into. So they stay in the home where they had their children, but they've left long ago. this is a way to get the change to move. And then what was a surprise for us, single parents desire community-based living. They love the fact about spare grandparents, but also people that are in the same life situation as them. Maybe a big little secret, but I think one way of making cross-generation work is to leave the students out. There are actually nothing that the seniors and students have in common. And at least I would say that I think that Plushusene tenants come later into the health system and will be in the need of nursing home facilities a lot later than non-Plushusene tenants, because the neighbors look after the neighbors. And I think, as Ashley touched on as well, it can be tough with the institutional capital and something people don't know. But I actually think with the right product and the right brand, it is possible to find the money and at the same time make a significant impact on quality of life. And maybe actually yesterday there was a trade in Denmark where two senior co-living built around the same community feeling as we have were sold yesterday to a Danish pension fund for around 100 million Canadian. I don't know the yield, it was just published yesterday, but at least it also shows that there are now also transactions happening on products like this. So this was a bit about Plushusene and our approach to community-based living. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. I mean, it is truly impressive, and obviously the fact that we can't keep up with your numbers is a testimony to just really how successful this is. I think as a physician, we've been struggling with the idea of housing prescriptions for certain patients, and I think that this is just so amazing in terms of privacy and choice, as you say, and neighbors looking after neighbors, and the way you've listened to whether people need guest rooms, whether it is about that glue because of having the sort of concierge there to listen and then respond. So it's really, really, really impressive, and I think we all want to move in, actually, but it's anyway. Thank you so much for this, and I guess, Richard, I guess it's time to go over to the questions. In that, we've got time for questions, and I think you've got a couple in your pocket there.
Yeah, well, I may not need my couple in my pocket because I think there's quite a few coming at us. I'll take them sort of in order, and I will cherry pick a little bit, and I might augment as well. But one question, Mark Richardson was right off the top, well-known housing advocate in the city of Toronto. But he was his main question related to I guess the operational issue of how landlord and tenant, as he's putting it, conflicts, particularly if there's disruptive residents. What is the kind of governance model to sort of, I don't know, police the kind of behavior that sometimes might arise, and maybe it's less of an issue than one might think, but I'm not sure who best to put that to. Perhaps that's a Martin question, but maybe Jack, all of you jump in on that, and there's many questions to come. Go ahead, Jack.
Well, yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So in Denmark, it's actually quite difficult to give someone the boot. Obviously, there are rules, and then there's a process. It's in fact, it's quite similar to Canada in some ways. Like, it's not easy to remove somebody from their unit. However, we have quite a few guidelines and rules for people that are living there. And of course, if they're in breach of those rules, then they have their they will be eventually asked. They will have to leave. There are other models as well. There are models where you might have somebody sign up for the amenity space as a separate membership from the unit. in which case you might not be able to kick them out of their apartment, but they won't be able to use the amenity spaces. So there's a few different models.
Does anybody else want to jump in on this? Because I do have a lot of other questions, and I also want to go to Robert Bernard, who's a special interlocutor that we've asked to from Toronto that we've asked to jump in for some questions as well. Martin, did you want to say anything else, or should I jump to Robert?
We are living under the same legislation, so it is actually the same.
Okay, good. Now the other part of Mark's question, I think, got answered later after he posted the question about minimum maximum lengths of tenure. I think that one of you covered that, I think, quite well. So I'm going to just bring in for a few questions Robert Bernard, who's the CEO of a Toronto startup, very interesting co-living model that Robert, why don't I let you introduce yourself, but maybe jump in with a few questions, and we'll come back to the audience questions.
Sure. Great to be here. And my first reaction is, where was this panel 2.5 years ago? What amazing information. I love the detail. As someone who's been invested in co-living for the last few years, it's one thing I can say about this sector is it's true to its word in that it's about community, because people like Jack have been helping out Toboggan Flax and others around the world to make co-living successful in Canada. And also people like Thomas Townsend and the whole CT Labs also the same. So I think one of the things, as our model is office to co-living conversion, because we think we need a lot of great housing faster. And I'm just going through your list. Jack, you said, sleep in the room, live in the building. We talked about, and the Honorable Carolyn Bennett talked about the need to reduce loneliness. What I'm getting from you, Ashley, is this works. The math works, and transactions have happened. And from you, Martin, I can see this. The rental housing model that you've got and the combination of using the best of purpose-built student accommodation and purpose-built rental to create a new form of housing is great. I think my question is, as we now have buildings in due diligence in Ottawa, other buildings coming online to build a portfolio across Canada and Calgary and Toronto, is whenever you say something's new, it seems like investors run away. And really, this isn't that new. It's just a great assembly of the best of. Like it's purpose-built rental, but better. It's student accommodation, but better. My question for the panel is, what was the tipping point where you felt like, okay, this has actually got some legs in Denmark or in the UK? What sort of needed to line up so that people started to get the momentum going in your respective countries?
Question. Go ahead, Jack.
Well,
start us off.
I think it was doing the collective intelligence exercise where we went to, the government authorities, we went to the companies, we went to the demographic itself and collected the research and showed that, yes, they were interested. We also tested rental levels with the focus groups. And so I basically went from having to present to the board of Catella, who was the owner of the project, where they were initially kind of challenging me quite a bit, saying this is not a tested concept. Like, we don't know if this actually works. And at that time, there weren't even like 10-year cap rates, even in London. So it was a bit of is this going to work? But when we did the research, when we did the studies, and it showed that there was an overwhelming demand for a concept like this, if it existed, that was the moment where we all said, all right, we're all in.
So do you want to add to that from your lens?
Go ahead, Martin.
Or Martin?
Yes, sure.
Oh, sorry.
You can, yeah, no, sure. You can say that there are different perspectives. One is that I can say that our side 4 and 5, it was actually the towns that knocked our door and say, we want Plushusene in our town. What do we need to do to make that possible? Then you know you're doing something right, at least from that perspective. You can say so that's important. There has been a lot of research in Denmark, not only our own. So the research naturally, like for us, proved that there was a business model, but the latest research, for instance, on seniors, if they want to live in a co-living setup, probably the community-based purpose rental, as I looked at or owned, is that right now 31% of 50-year plus are considering living in co-living, and 80,000 are actually searching for co-living. Which Denmark is not that big a country, so it's quite significant numbers. So I think from that perspective, when people are knocking your door wanting you to build a certain product, you are in a good location.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, from what I've seen in the sector, is sort of show the data and demonstrate sort of the underlying need. So previous role, I was in a consultancy capacity for some of the early pioneers in the Dublin market, and we're having to make and present sort of housing needs assessments as part of a planning application, and you're having to sort of demonstrate that depth of demand for a single occupancy renter. That was one of the biggest areas, I think, that helped drive design support, and broadly that sort of that pendulum swinging towards that 22, 24 square meter scale of unit. Was some people even brought in creating an actual apartment, i.e. some samples, and you're going to go, this is what the product is. And I think I've seen that happen in Spain, where there's a furniture group in the UK that created a sort of fully fitted out and scale unit, so people can actually go, well, this is the product. So it's bringing it, as Martin did so eloquently, that sort of horizontal village, bring it to life with pictures and sort of liveliness to it. That's much easier than you, Robert, talking to investors and taking a 2D plan and going, this is the product, right? It's so much more engaging when it's brought to life in 3 dimensions. And I think that's a big part of it, as well as that research piece. I think that's critical, because if you can turn around and say, look, we've talked to 2,000 people in Ottawa or however many people in Toronto, and go, you've been on the street and talking to them. That's where, if I take going back to the kind of BTR multifamily space, that's where the sector did a lot of work here in the UK between 2012 and 2016, 17 to kind of get momentum. And I think that drives it, and that drives the sort of pressure that then people respond to in policy and then product.
And
I want to get to
sorry, go ahead.
Go, Robert, very quick.
I'm just going to give the demand number, and ours is about 20 to 34-year-olds, but we've got 82% of Canadians, 80 in that group, saying they're interested in co-living, with 50% saying very interested in co-living. So that's enormous demand. They're not the ones with the money to invest. That's probably one of the challenges. Over to you, Richard.
Well, no, I want to get to some more questions, but maybe a quick follow-up on that last one. Would you say, just quick answer, each of you, was your greatest challenge in your markets the public policy challenge, getting governments to understand this and accept this, or the finance challenge, or is it pretty much equal? I mean, it feels like those are the 2 big barriers, but I maybe quickly, if you could speak to that.
Well, I think it was both. One, I spent probably 3 years lobbying the municipality of Copenhagen to recognize co-living as an asset class. Second thing was the financial aspects, and there I had to kind of convince everybody that co-living was basically the same as build to rent and should be looked at in the same kind of lens.
From my perspective, jump in?
I'm happy to go. I mean, from my perspective, it was both in tandem. I think that but without the sort of overarching kind of consistency from, whether it's Manchester, when I was doing work up there, when they sort of created a cap for quantum of units, a lot of those proposals came forward from the purpose-built student accommodation developers looking to diversify their demand output that they were looking for in what is quite a constrained high-density location, probably very similar in sort of urban form to Toronto. I suppose it was slightly easier here because the build to rent sector is very institutionalized, so that was a lot easier. But I think that policy is still very fragmented, and that's one of the things that the ULI kind of uh, going out and reaching out to getting local authorities around assets and touring and opening up that conversation, I think is critical, because that's without that you're much better sort of working as a pack, I suppose, to persuade and engage.
And you can say for Plushusen, as the investors approach me, I have the luckiness of not having to worry about the financing side of things. But you can say the municipalities are naturally a challenge, because getting the permission to actually build common facilities in some areas can be tough. It's also about how to put together a site to be allowed to build the right sizes of units, which can be a challenge. And then if they really want it, they also have to create, when they put the land out, create some rules around who can bid, and that can also be a challenge. So you can say for us it's the municipalities, but that's because I have the pure luck of having the guys with the money from day one.
Okay, I'm going to jump to some other questions. By the way, one of the questions that was answered by Eliane from CT Futures was, what are all these slides that you've presented available to our audience after the fact? And I think the answer is yes, and including the recording of this session. So we'll make sure that we follow up that in email. And there are a few questions that have been answered in the chat in writing as well. So if people want to look at that. I'm going to collapse a couple of questions here. One around demographics. Some of this has been touched on already. But maybe not another aspect of it, which is the idea of ownership in the model. Does that work? But both of them, I think, maybe point a little bit more towards the senior end of the spectrum. Question, I'm going to repackage the questions a little bit, but does a co-living model, obviously for different demographics, change how you lay out your basic physical infrastructure of a co-living model? I'm thinking things like, washrooms. Younger people might be willing to walk further to the washrooms in the middle of the night than seniors. Maybe even wanting, private washrooms in some cases. I'm guessing that's not part of the co-living model, but maybe you can address that. But also the issue of, could this work in a more of an ownership or maybe co-op model? Is there another model other than renting that this might work or has worked? I don't know the answer to that, obviously, so it's a good question. And I'll throw that, I guess, out to you all. Jump in. I'm not sure who to best jump on that one. Maybe Martin, start us off on this one.
Yeah, sure. You can say there are owner-based examples in Denmark around co-living. You can say there's also a lot of projects started up by people that want to have an owner-based setup. It's tough for them to agree on every single detail. It's also tough for them to get the permits from the municipalities. So while they exist, and a lot of the older ones built in the 60s and 70s are really owner-based. And then there are some cooperative housing alternatives where they own part of the investment and pay some rental, as well as the Danish model. And there's quite a lot of those around, and there's also companies specialized in building those. So the answer is yes, it is possible. It's a more difficult discipline, and at least from a legislation and permit perspective, it is more tricky in Denmark, because you don't typically have the companies behind you that are used to working in that field.
You others want to jump on that? There's also that idea of seniors versus young professionals, and the layout, and the amenities and so forth. How does that work?
I think I sort of there's 2 points there I sort of touched on earlier around layouts. I've not really seen too much of the multi-generational in the co-living that's in existence here in the UK. It's very much that sort of the peak of the demand is in that 25 to 34-year-old bucket, as well as sort of more mature students. I think touching on the question, I think which is probably another which is co-housing. There is countless examples here. One particular one that's very popular and got a lot of press attention was at Marmalade Lane in Cambridge, very sort of challenged supply market, and that was very much there's units there that are for sale, some are for rent. Very similar to your typology, Martin. I think 40 odd units, a common house which gets used by residents for community events, and that's very much kind of a push the cars to the outside. It's a car-free street. It's a horizontal kind of co-living style community, but very much family oriented. Not sure of the type of beyond sort of your normal kind of young working professional families. But that's a good example of probably a segment of the market which is obviously more suburban focused.
Okay, I'm going to jump to a question I know that was touched on earlier, but maybe go a little deeper. I think, Jack, you spoke to this in your remarks. So again, maybe Ashley lead on this one, but it's around the affordability aspect to the residents. How does that work? Give us maybe if you have some tangible examples of how living in a co-living model might compare to more traditional rental. But also maybe if you don't mind, if I could expand the question also to the developer or the asset manager and how that works. And we did hear there was some interesting numbers in this equation, and maybe you could expand on that. I'll maybe Ashley get you to start that one.
Yeah, no problem. I think that the biggest thing, several of the examples that I gave are here in the UK have a sort of single monthly payment. So generally you're renting a smaller unit, so your overall price goes down, but your rent per square foot is going higher. So generally the stats that are coming out is approximately a 7% discount versus the wider traditional private rented sector property. So your individual unit would cover, you'd pay your rent, it would cover including your council tax, utilities, and sort of Wi-Fi provision, as well as everything else you're getting in the building. So rather than the alternative for most people is living in a high cost rent by the room kind of a house of multiple occupation, HMO. So typically a 4 or 5 bed house split into individual units, and you're then arguing over who's stolen the milk in a shared kitchen. So broadly, it's designed to be cost advantageous while being able to cluster a lot of that cost for sort of managing the building across, say, 200, 300, 400 units. So it is, and that's probably again going back to the conversation on engaging and trust, is people wanting and seeing this as being something that local authorities want because of its affordability, and particularly if you're able to provide services at scale, you can get significant buying power. You can be getting Wi-Fi at cheaper rates than individuals, and I think that's one of the, again, when you're taking people around, that trust, because it's an operational asset, not just houses that are built or apartment blocks that are built, knowing that this is a continuous customer interface over the full life period of the asset. People know that trust is built not just on day one, but multiple people later. I think that's really important because that kind of stickiness with the brand as well comes with it.
Martin, do you want to add anything to that? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Martin.
Sorry about that. I think an important, or how we look at it, we are very aware that we are like a medium income product. You have to have a medium income product. So we're not hiding that, you can say, but still the affordability, the way that we are looking at it is through the shared facilities. We are actually convincing people to live a little bit smaller. So if you can leave out the 1 7 square meter room, that is actually the difference in your rent. If you were to rent something 7 square meters bigger, the rent would be the same as the rent is with us. So by using the shared facilities, you can say people are in the same price class as they would have been without the amenities. So that's the way, at least we look at it. But we are a medium and upwards product.
If I could just weigh in there as
Please.
well. I mean, it was a little bit difficult to convince the municipality that the average square meters sizes that they were prescribing for new builds was too large. Like, we basically had to say people are okay with living in a smaller unit. You know, as Martin said, 7 square meters lower, or if you take away the guest room and instead put a guest room in the amenity space instead, you have some savings there. And so we were finding through our research that people were okay with that. So in the end, they are paying less than what they would be paying for a larger apartment. But by square meter price, it's larger. So the investor is okay with that. So there are some really interesting, things that you have to do with this. The other aspect here is operational real estate. So all of this is operational real estate, right? You have added costs of not only your facility management, but your community manager. And I noticed there was a question here. Sometimes the community manager, she used to be a tour guide, for groups, or comes from the hospitality industry. And this is fantastic because, it's somebody that comes in and can really rally the community together and plan activities for them, deliver services, these kinds of things. And that adds an additional cost. So in your rent premium, you have to be able to cover that cost. So this is where you add an additional, a little bit of complexity to it, which not all developers like. If I can just throw it over to Ashley for a second, he's done something very interesting where he's separated out the PropCo, the actual asset, and the OpCo, which is the operational layer. And this is not always easy to do, or it wasn't in the beginning. And I think now people are understanding, the developers and the investors are understanding how these work together.
Maybe actually very, very quickly, because we're at 10:27, and I also want to give Carolyn an opportunity if you want to throw a last word in before we wrap up as well. So we've got 3 minutes to do all that. So Ashley.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, purely from a BTR perspective, so that, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of vertically integrated structure where our operating brand is sort of front and center to each asset, and the residents are interfacing with that, and there's customer awareness from it. And I think that's more and more important, particularly as that's publicly visible. The internet never forgets the reviews and all that stuff that sort of is the stickiness of online presence. And I think that's critical to how you sort of structure, whether it's team staffing and making sure that's as tax efficient as possible. And ultimately, there's full alignment of interest between operating platform and what the investor goal is, whether that's a particular business plan length or indeed their goals around what the position is after a certain period of time. Yeah, I mean, as Jack said, I think that's critical to the structure and partnership approach that you take on any operational real estate asset. And this is just one at as I touched on earlier, that high level of operating intensity when you've got potentially shorter tenancies, you've got quite a lot more people, and interfacing on some quite high-end amenity spaces depending on the operational strategy.
Thank you. Carolyn, did you want to put a last word in? We have about 1 minute.
Only just to say thank you. And I think Robert's question was right. Like, we needed this yesterday. I think I remember being told in caucus once that we, as the federal government, had got out of the housing business a long time ago, and the horse was out of the barn. And I remember saying, we're trying to find the horse and get it back in the barn. And I think that this is a way that there can be leadership, from municipalities, provinces and territories, the federal government. Everybody's got this problem of affordability, and I just want to know. I'm not allowed after COVID to talk about contagious or contagions, but this would be a good idea.
Well, indeed, and I'll echo your thanks as well to everybody, including you, Ambassador Bennett. Thank you for using your office in Denmark to help bring this message to Canada. I think that's fantastic. Really want to thank Jack. Of course, we've collaborated on many things. Ashley and Perry, Ashley and Martin rather. Thank you for being part of this panel. Let's not promote ULI events, so maybe take that slide down. Although there is an Earth Day event at noon today, if you're interested. We're at 10:30, so I will tie it off on time as we always do. But reminder, if anybody's interested in being part of the Toronto Roundtable, we have a little bit of a wait list building right now, but we'll remind you, we'll send you an email, Fiona's email again, to let us know, and we'll try to tuck in a few more conversations on this. And thanks also to Robert, Bernard, and Tobago and Flats for all the coordination that you brought to this as well. So thank you, and happy Earth Day, and we'll hope to see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.